Hi, Joy. Welcome to the Creating Meaningful Work podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so good to have you here. Tell everyone where you're tuning in from today.
Well, I am physically sitting in a WeWork in Paris, France, but there's a big image of Joshua Tree behind me. So I feel very conflicted. It's raining outside. It's desert behind me. The Eiffel Tower's down the street. Who am I?
It's so amazing. I love that you're in Paris, and I love that there's a big Joshua Tree photo behind you. So we have a little bit. I should have a Paris Eiffel Tower photo behind me.
I really wish you would come to the table with that.
Darn it.
You want it? Fun fact about French people that I was so shocked by is they are obsessed with Miami. Did you know this? Yes, they really love Miami. I don't know. Every time I tell a French person I've never been to Miami, they're like, "What? You live so close."
That is really funny. I have a friend who is from Italy, and he lives in the States now, but he is also very intrigued and obsessed with Miami and hasn't been there yet, but that's really interesting.
I think they said because it's in a lot of like movies, so it's like LA, New York, and Miami, and so it makes me want to go to Miami.
Wow, yeah, it's never really been on my list, but maybe I should add it.
Next time we'll meet up in person. We'll do a podcast recording in Miami.
Yeah, sounds good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. Tuning in, all the way from Paris. Joy, I would love to just start off. If you could introduce yourself, tell everyone a little bit about who you are, what you do. Why are you in Paris? Yeah. You're American in Paris. I know. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So cliche, an American in Paris. Well, I am here because when I was dating my now husband, and I found out that he worked for a company that was owned by a French company. And I said, "Are they based in Paris?" And he said, "Yes." And I was like, "Well, you get a job transfer there and I'll marry you." And so the man followed through. But no, we got married before that happened. So I'm not that shallow, but that is what brought us here. And then I am a literary and speaking agent. So I have an agency called Punchline Agency, and we represent people that we say are good on the page and the stage. And so I love public speaking. I just think, you've got your conference, so you bring in public speakers and just people who have a passion, but can share that passion in front of a stage. A lot of people say their worst fear is public speaking. And so when someone can do that craft so well, I'm always in awe and want to applaud. So that is what we do. But as you know, like if someone is a speaker and they're doing something that's picking up traction, oftentimes there will be interest or an idea for them of like, should I put this into a book? Or if someone writes a book and it's really successful, then inevitably they'll get asked to speak. So those are the kind of communicators that I'm drawn to representing. But I primarily represent American authors. I have a couple Brits just because I want to get closer to the Queen. I'm a monarchist at heart. But yeah, the publishers I work with are in the US. So that is what I do, and I love it.
That's awesome. What do you have any issues with time difference, or what is it like being so far away from most of your clients?
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a difficulty at times. I think sometimes the more like logistical business aspect of like paying taxes in France and the US will make me just like go crazy. But for my work style, I actually, oftentimes people have this idea that they're just going to contact their agent at any hour of the day. And that's just not my personality. I do not want you contacting me at any hour of the day. So I always joke that when I first moved here, I didn't even give my clients my phone number. I'm like, we've got email. And then there's this app called Marco Polo. If you guys don't know about it, it's the greatest app ever. And my husband's like, if Marco Polo folded, like so would Punchline. That's how we have writing cohorts that we use Marco Polo for. Or we have, all these things that allow me to work with my colleagues at any time of day, because you just leave these little video messages. So that makes it work. And then also I can finish all my emails while people are sleeping. You know how annoying it is to be in the middle of an email and you see the little like, oh, and it redirects your attention.
Yeah, it's or you just like, sent all your emails and you're like, got it done. And then 5 minutes later they reply and you're like, no.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great. I even just today, like I had an email from a lawyer at a publishing house about one of our contracts, and she's like had written me like twice, and it's like a little bit of a mix of my like now Frenchness, I would say, to be like, dude, like when you're not working, you're not working. Like I really don't. Like on Wednesdays, I take the day off to be with my kids, and I don't check my email. And so I said, I was like, well, I take the day off on Wednesdays, and also like I live in France, so I have different work hours. So chill out. I didn't say the chill out part, but that's kind of what I wanted to say.
Oh,
So there's
I
pros
love
and cons,
that.
but I've learned to make it work.
I love that so much. Yeah, I think there's lessons we can all learn from that because, I've been having lots of conversations with people just about how COVID and the pandemic made us realize how we were just going so fast and just on all
Yeah.
the time and really going at just unsustainable rates with work
Yeah.
and life and all the things. And so I love that you have that boundary that's already there from being in Paris,
Yeah.
but also that
Yeah.
you're setting your own, like with not working on Wednesdays and having that clear.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I've learned so. I mean, I know your listeners and your community are people who are probably working or starting their own companies, and I think and want to have like a healthy, because they're obviously wanting to do work that's meaningful and good in the world, but you can't do that if you're completely burned out. And I think a really interesting thing that I've taken from my French friends is, I think oftentimes in America, not everybody, but a lot of people, we kind of find our identity in our stress. So like we can talk about how much we have going on, and because we find our identity in our work because all we do is work. And so we want to talk about like when you meet someone, it's like, what do you do? What do you do? And in France, like you can meet someone, first of all, you don't ask somebody's name. It's like a very American thing to ask people their name. You just kind of like, you talk about vacation, you talk about art, you talk about food. But if you were to talk about your job and how stressed you are at your job, it's not a marker of like, oh, I'm really important because I have all these things going on. If you're talking about how stressed you are, that means that your life is actually unorganized. They see that as kind of like, you need to get your stuff together. You need to take a vacation. You need to like, so
Wow.
it's something that I've really tried to adapt. And I feel like my mom always talks about like, don't do anything that causes you to lose your peace. And so that's kind of the filter that I have for the projects I say yes and no to. I'm like, is this person or is this project going to cause me to lose my peace? And then I try to filter it that way. And
Wow.
so, yeah.
Oh my
But
gosh.
it's hard too, because you have a you have a company, you have a thing that you believe in, and you're like, man, if I was hustling as hard as her, I'd be at this point by now. So
Mhm.
it's a toss up. It's like quality of life or going public. you know
Mm, mhm. I
yeah.
think it was Glennon Doyle talked about in her book Untamed that how America still kind of has these like trying to prove themselves to the parents mindset,
Yeah.
and that kind of has still infiltrated into all of our psyches because we are still such
Yeah.
a new country here in the States, and
Yeah.
it really does feel like we're trying to prove ourselves still, like,
For
no,
teenagers.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like
That's so funny. I
we
haven't
are
read her
worth it.
book, but yeah, it's really funny because I've been telling my husband that lately. I'm like, I love America, but I said, I just living here, you realize there's so many things that they do that seem so backwards or like foreign to Americans from an efficiency standpoint. And I mean, trust me, there's things that America does so much better. Customer service for one, but it does feel like there's living here. There's this view that I can see now. I was like, I think America's a teenager. That's really funny that I'm not trying to plagiarize Glennon, but that's what I've been saying is like, it feels like we're going through, I say we, because I'm an American,
Mhm.
we're going through some growing pains right now in
That's
many
for sure.
regards. Yeah.
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 Yeah. I've never really thought of them as growing pains that we're going through, but yeah, I mean, we're so new. Like, I think
Hmm.
it's so easy to forget that because, we were born into, and yeah, I say we too,
Yeah.
being that we are both Americans on this
Yeah.
conversation, but yeah, that we are so new and we've been born into, this culture that's already been existing, but, Europe and Paris and so many other nations have just been around for so much longer than us.
Yeah. And so many of us, it's easy for us to be entrepreneurs because of the foundation that America has created. Like there's so much beauty to that. Like it's much easier to start a company and be an entrepreneur in America than it is probably here. I haven't tried it here yet, but what I know about bureaucracy and red tape in France, I'm like, I don't know. And so I think that's so beautiful, but I also think because that's so much of America's identity, that is why we all are so exhausted when we are entrepreneurs or trying to like make it, because that's kind of what we're known for, the American dream. And I just wonder in like 100, 200 years, are we going to look back and be like, the American dream burned us out?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And wow. Yeah. So interesting. Well, I love how you have a book that came out. When was this? Last year?
Almost exact. I released on my birthday, June 13th, 2021. So it's coming up on its birthday, which will 1 year birthday, which will be my 40th birthday.
Ooh, yay. How exciting. Congrats.
It's a big one. That's why I've dyed my hair blonde. I'm going through a midlife crisis. Can you tell?
I love it. Yeah, I remember because I had just had Ember, my daughter, who just turned 1, and I remember I was on maternity leave when I was
sent
digging
that to
into this. So your book is called Get to the Publishing Punchline, and there's a really adorable illustration here of you holding a baguette and an Eiffel Tower and a book, which feels very fitting.
Very on brand, except for the I just got a review from a guy, and many men have read my book, but I've noticed like one of my guy friends like did a tweet about it, and he like had his hand over the little cartoon character. And then I just got a review a couple of weeks ago from a guy that was like, a friend told me to buy this book. I really did not like the cover. It felt cheesy, but the book was great.
Okay, how many books do we have to read as women that have masculine covers and photos of these guys on it? And then a guy has a photo of a girl in a dress, and they're all mad. Oh man, we could dive into that one. So what this is, the subtitle is a fun and slightly aggressive 30-day guide to get your book ready for the world. So this is aimed to help people, men, women, all of all backgrounds, all experiences, to help them get their story out into the world. So tell us a little bit about how backing up even from the book, how did you get into this line of work of working with speakers, authors, storytellers, and what led you to this place of writing this book?
Well, so it's a how-to book of really figuring out if the idea in your head is a full book, or is it just a long Instagram post? Because sometimes I think we have this idea. There's so many people who are like, people have told me I need to write a book, or I have this idea in my head. And it's like, well, how do we figure this out? Is it enough? I had someone send me, they're like, I wrote my book, and I did the word count, and it was like 13,000 words. And that's, like my book right there, which is a small book, is like over 30,000. So I think there's so many things that we just don't know if we've never done it before. And my book helps you kind of figure that out. But in the beginning, I give people, I'm like, I'm going to give you a bit of my backstory. If you don't care to get to know me at all, jump to page, whatever. But the way that I got into all of this is, as I mentioned, I love public speaking. I was a communication studies major in college, and really, like, before studying in a communications class, I just kind of always felt like I, quote, hated school, because I always felt like I was one step behind everybody else. And then I got into communication, and I was like, oh, like, I'm good at this. I love this. I love learning this. And then simultaneously, when I was in college, my parents, my father was a pastor when I was growing up, but he and my mom always had a heart, because they came out of their parents had broken marriages. And so they were like, we want to help people's marriages. And so my dad kind of got this insight, he'd just been studying, he'd been counseling couples for, 3 decades. And so he got a book deal after shopping it around, getting a lot of no's. That's the one thing in publishing, you get a lot of no's. But that was happening. His first book came out like right when I graduated college, and he just, like, if I was with them, he would let me go to meetings with publishers, and I just kind of started building relationships with people in the industry.
And how old were you at that time? when you were going to those?
22, I think. Yeah, 22. I had moved down to LA. I went to college in Santa Barbara, moved down to LA. I thought I wanted to go to fashion school. And so that's a totally different thing that I was like, communication studies. I was actually focused on reconciliation and conflict resolution. And then I randomly babysat for this family one night. And the dad, I think, wanted to be a motivational speaker. He's like, what gets you really excited? And I was like, clothes. And somehow I'm just an action oriented person. And so I like went home and applied to fit them, which if I had gone, I got in and I was all set to go. And then my mom got cancer. She's okay, but I postponed my enrollment. I went back home to take care of her. But if I had gone, I would have been in Lauren Conrad's class.
Oh,
Yeah,
at
yeah.
FITM.
LC,
Oh
LC,
yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
watched
yeah.
that. Yes.
Oh,
Was
didn't
that
we
The
all?
Hills? Yeah, The Hills.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I
Laguna
had a
Beach
few friends
first.
that were there around the same time
Really?
she was there. Yeah, yeah.
Oh man,
Very
it
big
would have been
deal
the
seeing
dream.
her. Yeah.
So I postponed that. And then my dad's book came out and it was a big success. And so they were traveling around doing marriage conferences. And so then they were like, we need help with this. And I was like, well, I've always wanted to tell you guys what to do. So I became the director of their conferences. So that just put me more in the speaking and writing world. And then as I share in my book, then I went through a horrible breakup and was like very just I was just in this really dark place. And finally, when I got out of it, I started thinking about at all the conferences, it was people that were like my parents' age. And they were like, man, I wish I would have known this 20 years ago. Like, why didn't anybody tell us this? And so then in my state of like being so broken, because I almost married this guy, I was like, well, maybe like I feel really broken, but maybe because I have this like head knowledge from my parents and I've heard all these people, like maybe I can help my generation. So I started blogging and actually I didn't feel confident as a writer. And I remember having all these theories about our generation. And I was telling my dad all the time, and he was like, look, he goes, if to really articulate a theory that you have or something that you think, the best way to edit that, he didn't say the word edit, but that's what I say to people now. I'm like, writing or speaking, if you force yourself to do both mediums, even if you don't feel like you're a writer, you don't feel like you're one or the other, both are a natural editing process. And so he said, if you could start to articulate these, like by doing public speaking, like that would help fine tune what it is that you're trying to say. Because you can ramble at me on the phone all day, but like you really need to figure out what it is that you're trying to say. He goes, but nobody's asking you to come speak. Thanks, Dad. So why don't you start writing? And so I just got a WordPress, whatever it was back then. I slapped a clip art unicorn on the top. It was so ugly. And I just started writing. And that practice of writing, I mean, what took me hours and weeks to do at first, by the end, I had done over 500 written and video blogs, whatever. I could just get those things out. And so that's this thing of like practicing. If you feel like you have an idea, but you're like, but I'm not a really good writer, I'm not a really good speaker, it really is about practicing. And so through that, I then got approached by publishers to write a book. And my wonderful father was like, I think you have the personality to be an agent. I was like, thank you. He's like, you should represent your own book, which is now as an agent, I tell people, I'm like, if you have a publisher, because usually you have to get an agent to meet with any of the larger publishers. But if you're doing something, so like I was publicly speaking enough and had enough traction there that publishers came to me, I could have reached out for an agent and that probably would have made things a lot easier. But I'm glad I did it, because that is what made me realize like I can kind of understand these contracts. I can do enough, like ask enough questions and show that I don't know to push where I want to push. And then by the end of it, I was like, I like doing this. Fast forward, I write the entire book. And then for several reasons, I ended up sending back my entire advance and not publishing the book. I still have the book on my computer. And I know. But so that was just a moment where I'm like, why did that all happen? But now fast forward, I know that happened because I'm an agent that has deep empathy for the process of writing, because I know what it's like to write a book. Now I know what it's like to write 2 books and a children's book. And so I think having that alongside of being an agent is a definite perk for the people that I work with, because I know that it's such a vulnerable process, which
Mhm.
can I segue into you maybe sharing with your listeners something that you've been working on?
Oh my gosh, I'm nervous. Yes. Thank you. Well, yeah, I'm working on a book right now. I'm working on a book proposal, I should be clear.
Yeah.
So, and it's a beast. And I'm just doing the proposal, and I was
Yeah.
working on it this morning, and the overthinking everything.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
there's times when I'm diving into it and I'm like in the flow and I feel good, and then what I've really been, I think, struggling with, and I think this comes from, I kind of have these two parts of myself that I've always kind of had to have this dance around: this entrepreneurial minded part of me, the entrepreneur, the, thinking about the end person who's going to be reading this and the value that they're going to be getting. But then this artist, creative side of me.
Hmm.
I was a fine arts major in college, and very, have always been very creative and like to create things my whole life. So, and I've found that those two things, they can work together, but sometimes they don't work very well together. And
Yeah.
sometimes they kind of fight against each other. And so I've seen that very clearly throughout writing this book proposal, of just um, this part of me that is thinking about the publisher and what the publisher wants to see. And then also the part
Hmm.
of me that's like the message that wants to come out and be spoken out
Yeah.
into the world. And I find that when I'm trying to do both of those things at once, I get really
Yeah.
stuck. And so,
That's really hard.
yeah, yeah. Have you seen people experience that, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on the type of book that you're writing and the type of writer that you are. I have a friend who puts on writing retreats, and he has me Zoom in to do kind of Q&A. And one time, one of the writers said, what are publishers looking for right now? And I was like, oh, maybe as an agent, I should find that out. I'm like, I actually don't know. I know there's people that are just like, chronic writers, like they're just going to be producing their whole life and they can follow those trends and they can write and meet the need of whatever the publisher is looking to fill. But that's not, as an agent, I'm so limited in what I can take on, that I just take on projects that I'm like, I want to work with this person and I like what they've written. And then I work my hardest to find a publisher that catches the vision. And that's the thing I love about being an agent the most, is that I maintain relationships with editors at publishing houses, and so then I know which editors might be interested in the projects that I'm interested in. And then I just give, like, I am a cheerleader. Like, I'm like, this is why you have to publish this book, like, and so if I feel like I'm working with someone that's just writing something to fill a void, I don't feel like they're as excited about it, and so therefore I'm not going to be as excited about it. So I'm not going to be able to pump the publisher up to get as excited. So I'm sure there's so many agents representing so many different genres of books and types of writers. But the point is, like, that's a hard place to be in when you're like, I know that they're going to want this thing from me because I've created this incredible conference and I have this community of women, but then maybe there's this thing that I want to share that doesn't quite fit. And I would say, like, always overwrite, and then, you have an agent, you're working with Rachel, and, like, get her feedback on, just go all the directions that you want to go, and then, get her feedback. But I think that's the power of the proposal, is that it forces you, if you overwrite. And usually, just for people who don't know, for nonfiction, you don't necessarily want to have the book completed. You just need a few sample chapters, because a lot of times good editors at a publishing house want to work with you to develop how this kind of goes. Fiction's different. They want an entire manuscript. But for nonfiction, you would never submit a full manuscript, but you have this proposal that you're working on right now, which is what my book takes people through. And it's really hard. Like, so many people, like, Liz Bohannon, like, she has said over and over, the proposal was harder than writing the book. And I know so many authors that say that. And I always say the reason it was harder than writing the book is because the process of writing the proposal makes writing the book so easy, because you finally learn what you want to cut out. So when you're you're writing, okay, I think this may be, this is something that I can speak to, that I think the publisher would like, and I'm an expert in this area, so I'm going to write about it from my knowledge, but I also want to write this thing. And, it's like, it you'll look back in the table of contents and the chapter summaries that we go through in my book. It's like, that's the skeleton. And so then you might have had a great day where you were just going off on this tangent about something that you felt really passionate about, but then you step back and you look at that skeleton and you go, yeah, that extra femur doesn't need to be there. And so you can get it really cleaned up and clear before you pitch that to a publisher. And my feeling is like, write the thing that you are most passionate about, that you feel like to some degree will serve your audience. I'm assuming you're writing nonfiction, and I'm assuming that it goes along with kind of the themes of your conference and this podcast. So I feel like it's going to be really clear, and something that, they say, what is your audience clamoring for? And I think they're clamoring for because you've been speaking from the heart. So I think it'll come together as you force yourself to like do the table of contents, which is always, when we do our writing cohorts, people are always like, this is so much harder than I thought. Because what lives up here in your head, to get it down here. One of the things that I say to people is, after you finish your table of contents and your chapter summaries, I say, now take this to 3 or 4 trusted friends, maybe even people who would consider themselves writers, and say, like, what, because a lot of times people will say, well, which ones should I turn into like sample chapters and to submit with the proposal? Because it's not always 1, 2, 3. You really want to bring your best of your best of your best into the proposal. And so you can give that and say, okay, just read the sample or the chapter summaries and the table of contents and tell me of this, like, which chapters are you like, ooh, oh, I want to read more of that. And usually there will be, several people will say the same ones, and that'll give you a clue of like, this is the one that I need to expand. And then you also say, what feels like it doesn't fit? Like, what do you have questions about? And I really encourage people to do that, because if what makes sense in our head, we oftentimes like don't realize that it doesn't make sense in other people's heads. So even though writing is so vulnerable, if this is something that you want to put out into the world, it is so worth your while to get feedback from people. It doesn't mean you have to take all the feedback, but if you start to see themes from people of like, this chapter, I don't understand why it's here, or it leaves me with this question, it will really help clarify your proposal.
That's so good. That's really, really helpful. And it's really encouraging to hear for other writers that the proposal is harder than the book. Cause I've been like, if this proposal is this hard for me, how hard is the book going to be? And I've been thinking, that way, but that's really good to hear it. But it does really feel like, because you are creating that skeleton, like there has been a part of me that's like, oh, I just want to go in and like write that whole thing and like jam on that section for like an hour. But I've been really, doing a lot of the table of contents and putting it all together and stuff. And, but also to know, and this is something I'm always reminding myself of, is that, the book proposal isn't like the final thing. It will be changed and edited and rearranged. And so I keep trying to remind myself not to think that this is going to be the permanent thing. Cause I think I get stuck in that. And I think that can happen. I see this a lot in our community too. Just one kind of mantra that we say in Yellow Co is everything is beta, that like you're doing something, don't feel like this is the final thing, because even if you're doing a website redesign or branding, like your website's going to be constantly changing and being updated and is fluid. And so much of what we do and create, I think what stops us a lot of times from shipping it or putting it out is that fear that like this is permanent and can never change, and we it's etched in stone.
Well, that's why I think when you get that feeling of like, am I writing right now for the publisher or writing for myself, I would say push yourself more to write what feels true to you, knowing that the language in your proposal, I always encourage people wherever possible to have really like flexible language of like, I always tell people you have to have several subtitle alternatives, title alternatives, because that shows the publisher like, this person's written a book that they care about, but they're also, it's not so precious that they won't work with us because they do know what they're doing and they do know what audiences want. And so it's this thing of like, what feels truest to you in the proposal, hope that someone catches the vision of what you're doing, and then keep an open hand that, you know, unless you get a terrible editor, most editors will want to heighten and refine. And the editorial process is not a statement about your character or your writing ability. It is, the editorial process is a very important part of the creative process. See those little red marks as a gift because they want to make your words clear to the reader.
That's so good. I want to talk a little bit about, you talk in your book about finding your voice or clarifying your voice. And I love how wonderfully clear your voice, and you can just hear you speaking in your book. Like, it is so, you have such a way of communicating that is lighthearted and yet has such good, serious, helpful, tangible content in such an approachable, funny way. It's just a blast to read your stuff. How have you been able to take, you know, your voice and who you are, as, you know, we talk here, your joy, and really been able to have such a seemingly clear voice in your writing, and how do you help others really clarify their voice?
Yeah. I think that all those years of writing and practicing helped as I blogged and did video blogs, whatever. I think some of your listeners might be like, I do not want to do this, but I took improv for 5 years in Portland. I think that helped in the fact that it makes you get out of your head. Like you kind of learn to not be so like self-conscious. And so I think I've gotten to a place, I'm almost 40, as I said, where that little girl who felt like she was always dumb and a little bit behind everybody still has some triggers. Like when I'm trying to speak French and someone's mean back to me, my whole body gets hot. And I have that feeling of like, I showed up for 6th grade and the test was today and I didn't know that the test was today, you know, like, so I still have a little bit, but I think for the most part, I'm just kind of like, I'm going to write this book with knowledge that I feel like has been kind of behind a curtain for anybody trying to write a book. Like, where do we start? What do we do? And it's kind of been held close to agents' chest. Like, well, if you get my attention, then I'll tell you how to write a proposal. And I'm like, you know what? I don't care. I can't help everybody that I want to help. I'm going to put this into a book and I'm going to write it in the tone. Like, if you don't like my humor, you're not going to like the book. And so I'm just going to write what I would want to read. And it's not going to be for everybody, but it will be for people like Joanna Waterfall, who happen to like my sense of humor. So I think one of the exercises we have in the book is thinking about your audience. And I say in there, like, if you say your book's for everybody, it's for no one. And that's a common thing. I'm not the only one that says that. That's a lot of people in the publishing industry say that but someone could go, well, but everybody read Harry Potter. You know, I did not read Harry Potter, but a lot of people, demographics, age, read that book because it was so clearly written to young adults and it was so well done for young adults that they were, you know, locked in their room reading it cover to cover. And then of course, like older siblings or parents or cousins were like, well, what, or teachers were like, well, what are they reading? And then they got into it. So that's an example of how a book can end up being for everyone, but it's written specifically to an audience. And I think if people figure out, who am I writing to, then that will help you free up what your voice is. And, you know, and that can be for fiction or nonfiction, but I think getting clarity on that, because then it's hopefully a people group that you're passionate about. Like you, I would assume, have the people who come to Yellow Co in mind as you're writing, and you're not trying to appeal to, you know, 67-year-old male CEO, you know? And so then I think that actually frees you up to be more of your voice, because you're not trying to appease Bill and you're talking to the people that you know that you're passionate about. So
Yeah, that's really really good. Morgan Harper Nichols spoke at our conference in
Mm,
2019, and she talks about this. She talks about how for so long she was writing for the masses, and she kind of wrote into this, airy, like non-tangible sphere of people.
mm-hmm.
And she asked one day the people in her community on Instagram, which I think at the time she said she had like 10,000 followers, which now she has like millions and millions. But she asked them to write her something that they're going through or something that they're struggling with, and she was going to write a poem for them.
Yeah.
And so what it did for her was start to see the individual people that she was writing to.
Mm,
And she started
yeah.
to write to the one. And so her whole
Yeah.
message was like, write to the one person.
Yeah.
Don't write to
Yeah.
like everybody or get caught up with thinking, all these people are going to read this. What are all these people? But write to the one person. And that's,
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I know, I think she still does that, is take these things that people are writing to her, and she writes to these one person. And I mean, it speaks, to all of us. Her writing is so,
That's
so,
beautiful.
yeah, beautiful. So
I love
anyways,
that.
I
Well,
love that.
and I have an exercise in the book. I don't know if you've gotten to it yet, but I kind of talk about how, when you're younger and you made these like vision boards and things out of magazines, like I encourage people, like write a description. Like my target reader is Janet, and she's 32 and she listens to NPR and she works at a pizza shop and she's got some boyfriend issues, and whatever it is, write that detailed out. Then go searching through a magazine and find your Janet, cut Janet out, smack it where on your computer or wherever you write, and that will help you and it will help you as you're working on your book proposal as well.
Mhm.
It'll just go, am I writing to Janet right now, or did I just go off on a tangent?
Mhm. Janet, I love it.
Oh, Janet.
So your book, you have a really amazing thing that you are doing a one for one type thing. So when you buy
Yeah.
the Publishing Punchline book, you tell us a little bit about what you do with your
Yeah.
gift back.
Yeah. So I, as I mentioned, like in school, always kind of felt one step behind. And I was like, man, maybe I would have gotten into writing sooner had I felt like the way I learned about writing was really fun or funny. And so I decided to make, at first, we didn't even put it out for people to buy. I made this follow up. It kind of has the same branding as Get to the Publishing Punchline, but it's for kids. It says Writing with Bernard the Baguette, a kid's fun and silly guide to discover the joys of writing. And then it's written by Bernard the Baguette, not me. And then it says, and you, and there's a spot for kids to write their name on the front. So this can be their book. And I wrote it for kids in the foster care system. And there's an organization that we partner with in Oregon. So they make sure that kids who are specifically waiting in DHS offices, so they're like, listening to their caseworker call, like, can you take this kid? Could you take this kid? No. And so I was like, I want something to like teleport this kid into a different place so they don't have to listen to that phone call.
Mm.
And so we were first doing that, where we just for every copy of Get to the Publishing Punchline, we sent this. Well, then people found out and they were like, well, how can we get Bernard the Baguette? So then we decided to put Bernard the Baguette out. And so for both things, if someone buys this for their kid, or they buy Get to the Publishing Punchline for themselves or someone they know should write a book, a copy goes to a kid in the foster care system.
I love that so much. And I love the illustration. For those of you listening, you can't see it, but there's a illustration of a baguette, and he has like a little beret on and glasses and a mustache.
Yeah, he's real cute.
I love it. I love it.
I actually just met with a third grade class yesterday who all just went through this, the last few weeks of school, or I don't know, maybe the last semester, however third grade works, but they had just gone through it. And so then they wanted to Zoom with me on their last day of school. And it was so cute. They were like all sharing what their favorite, because it goes through creative writing, memoir, and journalism. And so they were all talking about their favorite things. And yeah, it really was touching. I was like, this is what it's all about. This is my meaningful work, Joanna.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I want to ask you a question before we wrap up our conversation here. How do you feel, and this is probably a loaded question that, might not be able to be answered in 1 minute, but how do you feel your work as a literary agent of working with authors and speakers to get their message out? How has that been something that has helped you learn more about who you are as a person?
Oh, I love that. It has really helped fine tune some things in my life. And I think specifically, I have started having editors at publishing houses. So, as I said, there's some publishers that, you can get a book deal without an agent, but there's a lot that it's required to have an agent because they don't want someone like I was knowing nothing about contracts or negotiations or anything, being like, well, what's this? And so now, if an editor that knows me and knows the type of books that I like to represent, they have an author that they know is going to write something, they will oftentimes say, hey, would you meet with this author? I think you would be a perfect fit for them as an agent. And that just like really warms my heart. And a lot of those topics are things about women and speaking up and, unveiling abuse of power and things like that. So it can be kind of heavy. And because I also like to represent books that are filled with comedy and things like that. So I kind of balance. I love comedy and I love justice. And so those type of things, people will send me funny authors and justice oriented authors. And I oftentimes work with faith-based authors as well. So that's kind of my little area, but especially around the faith-based authors, I'm kind of known now as the agent that represents people that are trying to make things a little bit better in Christendom specifically. And so I'm really passionate about that.
That's awesome. That's so good. Well, Joy, thank you so much for your time here. Real quick, you have an amazing program for writers. You have these cohorts, these 30-day cohorts. Can you tell us a little bit about how we can learn more about how to connect with that, what that is, how to connect with you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so we didn't just slap the 30-day guide on my book because that's a quintessential number that people use. We did it because we had taken people through these writing cohorts where we knew they could get a proposal done in 30 days. Now, you're working on your proposal. They are hard, and it is oftentimes very lonely work. And so I tried to write my book with a voice that allowed people to not feel so alone in this process. But then additionally, we were like, what if we created a community? Because so much about the marketing topic and creating a platform, people are like, I don't even know where to start. And so we create these 5 to 6 person cohorts where in 1 month's time, they get a proposal done. And people literally cry at the end because they're like, I didn't know I could do this in 30 days. And it's edited. They work with a developmental editor, a copy editor. They even have a one-on-one meeting with a marketing expert. And then they leave this cohort with 5 to 6 other people that have gone through the same process and want to promote each other's work and cheer each other on. And it's so wonderful. It's like my favorite thing that we've started doing. We've just been doing it for about a year now. And so we will be accepting the applications for our fall cohort. So if anybody's interested, I think it's punchlineagency.com/cohort. So I'll send you the link so you can put it in the show
put it
notes.
in the notes.
Yeah.
We'll put it in the
Yeah.
notes. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Joy. Everyone go, if you are interested in writing a book or discovering if you have a book in you, get to the publishing Punchline. Check it out by Joy Reid. Thank you so much, Joy, for your time today. I love chatting with you.
Thank you, Joanna. I'm excited to see about your writing journey and where it goes.
Thanks.